For me, I always find it helpful to have quotations from the authors themselves when I talk or when we discuss philosophy. So I took from two books that really exemplify these two concepts from Emerson and Campbell, the one being The Hero with a Thousand Faces and the other being The Oversoul. Emerson was an American Romantic author. He was actually the first to start the American Romantic movement. His work really emphasized to a world undergoing the Industrial Revolution the importance of nature, the importance of one's own strength in changing their view of the world, and also the oversoul, this interconnectedness between everyone. Emerson wasn't really a philosopher in the same way you think of Mills or Aristotle in establishing a wide moral system. So what I'm going to do is take some of his ideas from his short work, The Oversoul, and kind of philosophize them, draw some connections to some philosophical concepts we may know, and kind of flesh out his ideas a bit more with reason. Start with what he says about what we are as people. What is a man? Emerson says that man is a stream whose source is hidden. Our being is descending into us from we not know whence. I'm constrained every moment to acknowledge a higher origin for events than the will I'll call mine. All right, and how is man related to God? Well, there's no screen or ceiling between our heads and the infinite heavens. So is there no bar or wall in the soul where man, the effect, ceases, and God, the cause, begins? We lie open on one side to the deeps of spiritual nature, to the attributes of God. Justice we see and know, love, freedom, and power. These natures no man ever got above, but they tower over us. All right, so what can we take from this? Emerson says that man is a stream, and secondly, that he has to admit to a higher origin for events. This is the same conclusion as we see in, say, St. Thomas Aquinas or Augustine, the cosmological argument, the idea that things exist, everything needs a cause, and we are not the cause. Therefore, there must be a higher origin, a higher cause for those things. But Emerson is also de-emphasizing this idea of cause and effect. There's no bar or wall in the soul where man the effect ceases and God the cause begins. Therefore, there is a continual flow, as Emerson says, a stream between God and man. This is similar to the concept of continual creation. Rather than a deist point of view where God creates the universe and then sits back on his couch and watches everything happen, every moment, each piece of time, creation is being sustained and renewed. Here we see that idea of the stream. You can't differentiate between the source and the effect because it's a continual flow. Emerson also admits to this idea of divine law, this idea that there are concepts, love, freedom, power, that tower over man, kind of demand our obedience. We see some similarities to theology there. So what does Emerson say is God? He says that the supreme critic on the errors of the past and present, and the only prophet of that which must be, is that great nature in which we rest, that oversoul, within which every man's particular being is contained and made one with all other. Within man is the soul of the whole, the wise silence, the universal beauty, to which every part and particle is equally related, the eternal one. We see the world piece by piece, as the sun, the moon, the animal, the tree, but the whole, of which these are the shining parts, is the soul. The whole of which these are the shining parts is the soul. Well, first, through that first section, we see that Emerson's concept of the divine is a unifying force. Every man is made one with all other. Same idea of cause and effect, that we cannot differentiate piece by piece, but instead we are coming to a fuller understanding of seeing everything as one. To me, this draws some similarities to hylomorphism and semiotics. Semiotics is the study of science that, just as a sign has an outward meaning, it's separate from that meaning. The word semiotics and the concept of semiotics is different from the spelling semiotics. Hylomorphism, a term which has been used to refer to Aristotle's work, Plato's work, it's been around as long as Greek philosophy, is the idea that you can differentiate a thing into its matter and form. There are two things which make up all of physical creation. Let's take this water bottle, for example. The form of the water bottle, depending on who you ask, either the form is in my head or out in the world of forms. Basically, all that a water bottle is contained, its essence, you could say. It's also made up of matter. This would be the metal the plastic that makes up the water bottle. And we can kind of see this in imagining if I melted down this water bottle into a puddle of metal and plastic, it wouldn't be a water bottle anymore. It'd be a puddle. It'd have the matter of the water bottle, but it wouldn't be partaking in the form. Aristotle also uses this to understand what a man's soul is. He says that the soul is the form of man. It's the essence of what it means to be a person. In the same way, Emerson's saying that the Oversoul is the form of creation. You know, we look at the world piece by piece as the sun, the moon, the animal, but the whole is the soul. Just as we can't understand the soul of a man by looking at the foot, the knee, the elbow, we can't understand the Oversoul unless we see the world creation as one thing, as we look at it in terms of the whole. A pile of bricks is different from a house. The matter is the same, but the form of the house is contained in this image, where it is not in this one. So the Oversoul boils down to, viewing creation, viewing existence, and looking at its essence. That is the unifying force, the Oversoul. So what is the relationship between a person and their soul, and the soul and the divine? Emerson says that a man is the facade of a temple where all wisdom and all good abide. The soul whose organ he is, would he let it appear through his action, would make our knees bend. When it breathes through his intellect, it is genius. When it breathes through his will, it is virtue. Through his affection, love. And the blindness of the intellect begins when it be something of itself. All reform aims in someone particular, to let the soul have its way through us. In other words, to engage us to obey. All right, so we see two different concepts here. One, that the man, the person, is kind of the exterior and is an organ. It is a thing that is made use of by the soul. The soul is, all wisdom and all good. And it is through the person that the soul, enacts itself into the world. Genius, virtue, love. We also see that Emerson says what proper action is here. He says that all reform aims is to let the soul have its way through us. We are called to surrender, we're called to obey. For a few diagrams, I took a few different examples of what different philosophies say proper action is. The first one, the popular Christian view, you'd find this in a Sunday school, for example, is that God bestows grace on a person, and that person, through love, brings goodness into the world. Aristotle says that a person, through knowledge of the good and action towards the good, and partakes in the good in the world. Emerson says that the Oversoul acts through the person to bring about a virtue of beauty and genius. That's similar to the others, but what's interesting that Emerson adds is that he equates the Oversoul with virtue, beauty, and genius. He says that the Oversoul is genius, it is virtue, it is love. The idea that the person is just a translator, and these terms are just the Oversoul and different faculties of man. It's as if the Oversoul is a light shining through the prism of a person, and the separate strands, they're all still light, but we just see them, we just differentiate them as different virtues. He equates them as one and the same. So what does he say about the soul interacting with other people? Well, he says that the larger experience of man discovers the identical nature appearing through all of them, all people. Persons themselves acquaint us with the impersonal. In all conversation between two persons, tacit reference is made as to a third party to a common nature. That third party or common nature is not social, it's impersonal, it's God. We do not yet possess ourselves, and we know at the same time that we are much more. I feel the same truth how often in my trivial conversation with my neighbors, somewhere higher in each of us overlooks this byplay, and Jove nods to Jove from behind each of us. This idea that if the Oversoul is a unifying force, and it is the form of all of us made present through each person, it's the same God, same Jove behind each person. Emerson says that we are all gods. And this is kind of what he means by that, is that we can see the Oversoul, we can see goodness through each other. Jove nods to Jove. So the collective unconscious. Interestingly enough, Joseph Campbell does not use the term collective unconscious in his works, and he's not the creator of it. The collective unconscious is actually a term coined by Carl Jung, who was a psychoanalytic psychologist. This means he came from the school of Sigmund Freud. He and Freud later had a falling out, but both of them focused on dreams and the unconscious. Psychoanalysis, when you picture, say, psychology with a person on a couch talking about their thoughts and a psychologist writing down notes, that's a psychoanalytic school. This idea that, and focus on dreams as a language of your mind to teach you a lesson about yourself. Say I had a dream about being chased by a giant rabbit. The psychoanalyst would say that the fact that it's a rabbit symbolizes something. The fact that it's a giant rabbit symbolizes something. The fact that I'm being chased by it symbolizes something. That is a lesson taught by my unconscious that it is trying to tell me. Carl Jung's term collective unconscious is pretty simple to break down. We can look at collective and unconscious. Let's start with unconscious. Jung uses this to refer to everything that we are not aware of. Unconscious could mean both, memories of the past that we've forgotten or that we've repressed, but it could also mean sensory impulses that we don't remember right now. Say, if you had an itch in the back of your head right before we had this talk, and as we're talking, you forgot about it. Or you had this urge to yawn, and you forgot about it. They're just still there, but it's just unconscious. Jung differentiated between a personal unconscious and a collective unconscious. The personal unconscious is that which is unique to each person, their own memories, their own impulses. The collective unconscious just means the parts of the unconscious psyche that are the same in each person, that are shared. Everyone has a concept of a mother figure or of a hero figure. And the fact that we can differentiate between, movie tropes, say, this thing happens in this movie, and it's similar to this thing that happens in this movie. That's something we're not always aware of, but it's something that all of us can understand, all of us share. So the collective unconscious isn't really a spiritually binding, spiritually unifying force the same way Emerson's Oversoul is. So I admit it's a bit of clickbait to use the term collective unconscious. But we can further understand spiritual truths from the collective unconscious through the work of Joseph Campbell. Campbell, you may know him from his book, The Hero with a Thousand Faces, was one of the foremost figures in propagating the pattern within all mythology, the hero's journey. He read Carl Jung, he read Freud, he read Otto Rank, various psychologists and philosophers before him, and came to this understanding that regardless of time and of location, there is this inherent shared belief in the hero and certain principles associated with mythology that exists within all human society. And he actually makes a connection between psychology, between Jung's work and mythology. He says that in mythology, symbolic expression is given to the unconscious desires, fears, and tensions that underlie the conscious patterns of behavior. Mythology, in other words, psychology misread as biography. Think about what I was saying about Jung a few minutes ago, and the idea of dreams, that, your dreams happen, but they're really symbols of a lesson you ought to be learning. Mythology is the same thing. The Minotaur of King Minos, the meditation of Buddha under the Bodhi tree. There are symbols within mythology, within tradition, that are meant to be spiritual lessons to us. Think of Jesus' parables, for example. He doesn't tell you what the kingdom of God is directly. He says it is like a farmer sprinkling seeds or a fisherman casting nets. This idea of symbols and meaning, is common to psychology and mythology. Modern psychology, at least modern in psychoanalytic psychology, is just the current understanding of mythology. So what does Campbell say the unconscious represent if psychology is mythology? Campbell says that the metaphysical realm is the unconscious. Correspondingly, the key to open the door the other way is the same equation in reverse. The unconscious is the metaphysical realm. To recap and to bring further understanding, Campbell uses these terms conscious, unconscious, and superconscious. In the same way as Jung, consciousness means what we're aware of, and unconsciousness means what we're unaware of. Campbell also uses the term superconsciousness, super meaning above, that there is something beyond material and physical awareness, say a spiritual dimension. But what should be superconscious to us, what should be most presciently aware to us, the divine, is unconscious. The metaphysical realm is the unconscious. So what ought to be superconscious is unconscious. And Campbell has a remark about that. The constriction of consciousness, to which we owe the fact that we see not the source of universal power, but only the phenomenal forms reflected from that power, turns superconsciousness into unconsciousness, and at the same instant and by the same token, creates the world. There's a lot in there, so let's break that down a bit. Campbell is saying that there's this constriction of consciousness from superconsciousness divinity, spirituality, what should be above the metaphysical world, to unconsciousness, the idea that we're unaware of it, and that we see things the thing that we're most aware of is just physical things, is the conscious world. Spirituality, divinity are things that sometimes we can't sense. They're in the unconscious. And that idea, Campbell unites back to this idea of symbols. We can't see the universal power, but only the phenomenal forms reflected from that power. We can see symbols of God, we can understand symbols of God, but we can't see God himself in this world. And he says that this understanding, this constriction of consciousness, is precisely the meaning of the biblical image of the fall. If the metaphysical should be superconscious, ought to be superconscious, and at some point was superconscious, that we saw divinity most really, that's like being in the Garden of Eden in Judeo-Christian tradition, that we walked with God. The fact that we cannot see that divinity most presciently, that it is now unconscious to us, means we are separated from God, separated from the metaphysical realm. We have fallen out of Eden. So what does Campbell tie consciousness to when it comes to the hero's journey? Because his greatest work was the hero's journey. Well, he says that the hero is the one who, while still alive, knows and represents the claims of the superconsciousness, which throughout creation is more or less unconscious. Let's translate that into language we've been using. The hero is the one who, while still alive, knows and represents the claims of the divine, which throughout creation is more or less unshown. The hero is the person who brings, God into an ungodly world, brings divinity into a merely physical world, goodness into an amoral or immoral world. That is the essence of hero's journey when you look at it through a lens of consciousness. What else can we learn from the hero's journey? Well, the main step that Campbell emphasizes is the departure from the known. This is the hero in mythology, but also in tradition, leaving the community. In Aboriginal tradition, for a right of manhood, the participant would have to leave the community and hunt on his own and be separated from everyone. You could think of this too in modern day thought, say, the Iron Man movie. Tony Stark, after getting caught in an explosion, is separated from his friends and is alone in this cave. This exile is the first step of the quest, says Campbell. Each carries within himself the all. The differentiations of sex, age, and occupation are not essential to our character. The image of man within is not to be confounded with the garments. For the first time, we're hearing language that bears striking similarity to Emerson's. Both Emerson and Campbell have this idea of an exterior. For Campbell, it's the garments. For Emerson is the facade of the temple. And this more important interior. For Emerson, that was the oversoul, goodness. For Campbell, that's the image of man. It is interesting to note that Campbell says the man is what is within, not what is outside, whereas Emerson's saying something different. The biggest point Campbell was making here is that the image of man is much more essential and much more intimate than these other aspects of ourselves, sex, age, occupation, bodily aspects, you could say. So what does Campbell say is the image of man? What does Campbell say is the essence of the soul? Well, Campbell says that the aim is not to see, but to realize that one is that essence. Then one is free to wander as that essence in the world. Furthermore, the world too is of that essence. The essence of oneself and the essence of the world, these two are one. Hence separateness, withdrawal, is no longer necessary. Exile brings the hero to the self and all. In short, Campbell's saying that we're asking the wrong question. The deepest spiritual truth of the soul is not what the soul is, it's that it is. Existence, being, is what we should be most focused on. That is the deepest spiritual truth to us, and that unites us with the world. The world also exists, also is. And in both oneself and the world being, we're united to the world. It's not quite the same, but for me it resembles the concept of aseity from Thomas Aquinas' work. Aseity is a quality of God that specifically means that God is independent of existence, is self-sufficient, God does not require existence to exist. But taken in a more general level, aseodia is the idea that essence, specifically God's essence, who God is tied to his existence, that God is. In Judeo-Christian tradition again, when Moses asks Yahweh what to call him, Yahweh says, I am who am. Who he is tied to his existence. In the same way, Emerson's focusing on that we exist too, that spiritually, what is most essential to us is that we exist. And that ties together who we are with the world, the essence of each other, people who also exist, and the divine, because God too is who is.